Today we find ourselves in day 17 of our 40 days through the book of Mark, and we are reading Mark 6:45 to 56. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and head across the lake to Bethsaida while he sent the people home. After telling everyone goodbye, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on the land. He saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. He intended to go past them, but when they saw him walking on the water, they cried out in terror, thinking he was a ghost. They were all terrified when they saw him. But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." Then he climbed into the boat, and the wind stopped. They were totally amazed, for they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. Their hearts were too hard to take it in. After they crossed the lake, they landed at Gennesaret. They brought the boat to shore and climbed out. The people recognized Jesus at once, and they ran throughout the whole area, carrying sick people on mats to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he went, in villages, cities, or the countryside, they brought the sick out to the marketplaces. They begged him to let the sick touch at least the fringe of his robe, and all who touched him were healed. So in the last several verses of Mark chapter 6, we see again another amazing miracle. We just wrapped up and talked about how Jesus fed over 5,000 men, up to 15 to 20,000 people. And at the conclusion of this, he puts the disciples in the boat and he says, "You guys go across the lake. I'll catch up with you later on." And he sends the people home. And then we read that Jesus gets alone and once again he prays. Jesus again models for us the importance of prayer as he intentionally gets alone time with his Father. And the question is, if Jesus did this, how much more so do we, as his followers, need to be a people who spend time intentionally in prayer with the Father? Now, Jesus sends his disciples on a boat across the lake, and later on, we see that the disciples encounter the storm. Now, just so we know, just so we're clear, Jesus is God. Jesus knew the storm was there, and he purposely sends the disciples into trouble. You see, in the middle of a storm, that's when our understanding of God's providence and his power, they are greatly increased. Our faith and our dependence in God alone grows whenever we face a storm. So once again, these disciples, many of them are fishermen. They are used to being in a boat on a lake in the water, and yet these waves are crazy. This is an amazing storm, and they are in trouble, and they are in need of a Savior. We see in verse 48 that Jesus knows his disciples are in trouble. And so what does he do? Well, he walks on the water. According to commentaries, maybe several miles. He walks on the water so that he can be near the disciples in the midst of their storm. So he's walking out there, and what do the disciples do? They don't recognize him because, first of all, they're not expecting anyone to be walking on the water in the middle of a lake, in the middle of a storm. And so their first conclusion is he is a ghost. And we see twice in 2 verses that they are terrified about what they are seeing. They are terrified, and their fears have gotten a hold of them. And what do we see in verse 50? In the midst of their fear, the fear of the storm and the fear of this figure walking on the water to them, Jesus says to them, "Have courage. Don't be afraid." Then he says, "I am here." And we see that he gets in the boat, and what happens immediately? The wind stops. Now, again, when he says, "I am here," we can just stop with "I am." Jesus, again, is connecting himself and his power with what the disciples and what the Jewish people have known throughout the whole Old Testament, that the one who's referred to "I am" is God. So here we see very clearly, Jesus walks where only God can walk, in the middle of a lake, in the middle of a storm, in the middle of the night, and he declares himself to be deity, because that's who Jesus is. So then we see again, verse 52, the disciples, they still don't get it. In fact, this verse says is that they have hardened hearts. They didn't connect the dots. They didn't fully understand the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. They don't understand what it is that Jesus walked to them in the middle of the storm. And here's what we see. Jesus, in this case, does not rebuke them. He does not give them a hard time for not understanding. He doesn't talk down to them. He is simply there in the boat and he is patient with them. Why? Because there's so much for them to keep learning. I find that so encouraging because often that is my story as well. I don't fully get what God is doing, but God is so patient with me as I begin to grow and continue to grow in understanding of who He is and what He is doing in my life. It would be easy to assume that the storm has driven the boat off course, but we see that God in His sovereign power has the boat land exactly where He wants it to. As soon as they get off, there is hurting people who are in need of healing hands, and the boat lands exactly where they need to be. What do we see over and over again? Well, Jesus does not turn away people who are seeking after Him. And here's what's such a good encouragement for us today on day 17. Jesus knows you better than you know yourself. He is more compassionate than we could ever hope. Jesus is more powerful than we can ever imagine. And He knows our needs more perfectly than we do. I think a prayer for today would be simply this: God, please soften our hearts to the things that you are teaching us. We want to know you more. I encourage you to pray that prayer today and have that be on the top of our minds as we go throughout today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow as we begin chapter 7 as we continue our journey through the book of Mark. See you soon.